Great. We'll go ahead and get started. So, hi everyone. Welcome to our Buckeye Wellness Lunch and Learn today. It's great to have you all here. I'm Nicole Johnson. I'm the program coordinator with Buckeye Wellness out at the Office of the Chief Wellness Officer. So, I'm going to highlight a couple of upcoming events. On December 15th, we have the second session of the Live Well webinar series. This is a monthly webinar series, and it's all about the importance and ways to incorporate wellness into the classroom. So if you work with students at all or in any type of classroom teaching setting, this is great, wonderful information there. And then on January 24th, we will be hosting our next Buckeye Wellness Innovator Orientation. If you are passionate about wellness, you're interested in wellness, you want to find out more of what's going on at the medical center, the university side, and really want to bring that to your colleagues, we would love to have you join the team. You can attend the orientation, get ready to go and become a Buckeye Wellness Innovator. Our next Lunch and Learn will be on January 28th. And as of now, we are planning on hosting it in person. This will be our first one back in person. If you are familiar with our webinars pre-COVID, there is still a streaming option. So if you're working from home, can't get in, or can't get away from your desk for the full time to get to BRT, you can still join us and watch. But we are really hoping to gather in person and have it there. Every Monday, we have Movement and Mindfulness Mondays. These used to be at 11:50. They are now moving to 8:30 a.m. So this is a really good way to start your Monday, start your week with 10 minutes of wellness. So we really encourage you to do that and hope to see you there. And lastly, our group fitness classes. They are continuing. They're still on Zoom. Make sure that you keep up with the YP4H calendar. Going into the holidays, some schedules are shifting, and then into the new year, we do have some new classes being added, and sometimes of our current classes are shifting. So make sure you keep up with that on the YP4H calendar. You can register on Link to Health, and we hope to see you guys out some of those classes, joining our awesome instructors. So as always, during the presentation, any questions that you have, go ahead and put them in the chat box. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation. I will now introduce our wonderful speaker today. Senior Chaplain Richard TenNapel has been a chaplain at the James for 2 years, covering the 20th and 21st floors. He did his training at another local healthcare system where he developed a passion for oncology and spiritual care research. He is a firm believer in that evidence-based insights are the best way to understand and utilize spirituality for improved well-being and resilience. So Richard, I will pass it over to you and stop sharing.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Again, my name is Richard, and I'm a senior chaplain at the James. Today, going to be talking about spirituality and resilience, and kind of how spirituality can help with hope and meaning amidst all of the challenges that we face. So that's where we're going. The objectives for today are going to be explore the connection between spirituality and resilience, identify common challenges that we face and ways spirituality can aid our coping, and then learn ways spirituality can help foster hope and new meaning in our lives. So those are our objectives, and how we're going to get there is we are going to talk about spirituality, resilience, and spiritual distress, kind of go through what each one of those are and how they relate to each other. We will talk about facing the challenges of uncertainty, isolation, and grief, which I feel are particularly relevant these days, and the role of hope. What is hope? How to think about hope and how to foster hope, and new meaning. And I provide some additional resources if you want to look more into spirituality. So what is spirituality? Let's just start there. Let's start at the basics. And research shows, this is from Dr. Christina Pahalski, some of her research. She's a palliative doctor who got really interested in spirituality, and this comes from some of her work. Defines spirituality as an individual's relationship to an experience of transcendence, or the individual's sense of peace, purpose, interconnectedness, and that includes existential concerns and beliefs and the meaning of life. So it's a very broad concept. I like to also just define religion, because oftentimes spirituality and religion are kind of utilized in the same to mean the same thing, but they're actually quite different. Think of religion as a formal structure through which a person expresses spirituality within a community, which is organized around common beliefs, attitudes, practices, traditions, and relationships. So religion, in the early research, spirituality and religion were they were used together. They were the same thing. Through the years, as more research has been done, what they've discovered is people think about them very differently. And actually, religion is more of an expression of someone's spirituality. And one of the ways I like to conceptualize spirituality, it helps me a great deal to think about spirituality as connection to self. That's the first area. And that's sort of your core values, your roles in life, how you view yourself. And it's also that mind, body, spirit connection, that when something happens to your body, it affects the other areas of your life. It affects your spirit, it affects your emotions. So the first connection is to self. The next one is transcendent, connection to the transcendent. And that just means beyond ourselves. So that can be God and faith, if that's an important part of your life. It can be nature. It can be music and art. It's just anything that's beyond us that we feel that connection to is a part of our spiritual life. Other people, key relationships in our lives. People can be pets. People have strong connections to their animals and their pets. So an important part of spirituality is those connections. And the meaning. And meaning is aspects of our life that add value. That's one way of thinking about it. Another way is thinking about what matters to you, or how you see the world, how you make meaning in the world, and what is meaningful to you are those aspects of your life that define who you are and how you view yourself. And the last thing there is purpose. And that activates our life. It motivates us. Why are you here? What are your goals and your dreams? So this kind of encapsulates a lot of the research and what research shows that how people think about spirituality. And it helps me to visualize it this way. When I'm meeting with patients, I often have this kind of in my mind, thinking about their connections and how they view themselves and what's meaningful to them. So I find this helpful. And so let's also talk about coping and resilience. Let's start with coping. So this refers to one's using purposeful actions to handle life situations. It's a broader idea, and this can be functional or dysfunctional. Now, the past 20 months have been hard, so I'm sure there's been some dysfunctional coping, no judgment there. But what I would say is the goal is functional coping. We want to do things that are going to build us up, and that's resilience. Resilience refers to positive and functional handling of oneself and one's life. It's the ability to recover, recuperate, regenerate following tragic events or following hard things that we face in life. So we want to be able to bounce back. That's the goal of resilience. So what's the connection between spirituality and resilience? Well, a study showed that it affects our life's values. So that's, again, that connection to self, the values that we have, the values that we enact in the world. It affects our relationships. If you're resilient, you're going to have better relationships as they support your resilience. Relationships are a key aspect of resilience, key aspect of spirituality. And it increases personal meaning. When we're resilient, we make meaning in life. We have a clear sense of meaning and purpose, and it improves coping, which is our overall goal, to cope well when life throws us curveballs. So if you think about our diagram and we think about resiliency, that one study showed that it affects our connection to self, and it affects ourselves to others, and it affects meaning. So if we think about resiliency and spirituality, there's a strong connection there. If we're pressing into our spiritual lives, working on these connections, we're going to be more resilient, which is, again, the goal in a life that often throws us hard things. Let's talk about when hard things happen. Suddenly, past 20 months are a great example. COVID happens. social unrest due to racism, all of these things that impact us. Suddenly, these connections that may have been going well are impacted. These life events that are hard doesn't just have to be the past 18, 20 months. It can be a diagnosis. It can be issues at work. All of these things that we face impact our spirituality, and they can disrupt those connections. So suddenly our connection to ourself is impacted. Think about our inability to go to church or to even go to museums. The theater was closed. All of these ways that we connect with art, it can be hard to see other people. My wife and I, we had our second child right at the beginning of the pandemic, and my parents saw him through our door. They didn't get to meet him for quite some time, and that's disrupts the spiritual life of our family. Our meaning is impacted. Our purpose, our goals, the things we're hoping to accomplish are going to be impacted by these events. So when something comes along and our spirituality is impacted in this way, what can be part of the outcome of that? Well, something we talk a lot about in the chaplaincy world, in the spiritual care world, is spiritual distress. And spiritual distress is characterized as a state of suffering related to the impaired ability to experience meaning in life through connectedness with self, others, world, or a superior being. So again, spiritual distress arises as those connections are impacted by the challenges that we face. And that's often expressed as fear or sadness, regrets, anxiety. People can, lack of hope, despair, and lack of meaning in life. So a lot of times when I see emotional reactions or emotional distress, I'm wondering, one of the questions I ask is, what is the spiritual stress? What connection is being infringed upon in that person's spiritual life? And so I like to ask those questions and figure out is there a connection between what I'm seeing emotionally and those connections, that they might be impinged because of something hard that happens. And that was especially true over the past year or so. That's been very relevant. And one of those challenges is uncertainty. There has been a lot of uncertainty. There is in general a lot of uncertainty in life, but this is especially true recently. And that is defined as a psychological state stemming from an inability to predict the future, or the incompatibility between two ideas, an idea and an experience, or an idea and behavior. And I think how we often think about uncertainty is that first part. It's the situational uncertainty from our inability to predict the future and to know what life is going to throw at us. But there's another part to that the research shows and psychologists think about, and that is when two ideas are incompatible, or your ideas about something and how you've experienced something are different, or an idea and how that is enacted through behavior. Those things, when there's incongruence there, leads to this feeling of uncertainty. And there are a couple of reasons why we don't deal well with uncertainty. And there's just an intolerance of ambiguity. So this is whenever we interpret something that is neutral or ambiguous as threatening, as sort of an evolutionary function. If we don't know, it's going to be a threat, and we need to be on watch for that. Well, we face a lot of uncertainty, and if we're constantly in this heightened state, there's going to be an impact on our well-being. And there's a need for cognitive closure. Another function of our mind is we want a definitive answer on open issues. We want to avoid uncertainty. We want to avoid confusion and ambiguity. We want to avoid those things. And so this can often lead to decision-making that's not in our best interests. Decision-making that we do because we want to avoid that stress, avoid that the confusion and ambiguity. We want answers. So it can lead us to make some decisions that might not be in our best interest. Uncertainty orientation. On top of all that, some people just have an orientation that is, they want this certain familiar. Some people are better when there's uncertainty. They thrive in those. That's great. If you like the uncertainty, that's more power to you. I know it's hard for me, and I know it's hard for a lot of folks. So it's good to think about these things and where you fall. Maybe you have an orientation towards uncertainty, and that's okay, but you do struggle with, you do view those things as threatening. So you can be anywhere, you can deal with all of those, or maybe just a few of them or a couple of them resonate. But uncertainty, there is an emotional component that leads to fear and anxiety, sadness and despair, anger. People, when there's a lot of uncertainty, I experience people being angry often and upset, and kind of taking that anger out on the people that are around them who had nothing to do with the uncertainty. But it can be a difficult thing to navigate. And if we think about, our poor, battered, and bruised spirituality framework here, dealing with uncertainty affects all of these connections. Things that were once certain, we don't know. It affects, we start asking questions about our faith and what is the meaning in all of this, and what is our purpose now that we can't do certain things. It can be very challenging. And if we think about this spirituality framework, it can also guide us to help us overcome and to live with uncertainty. If we think about these connections, what are some things in terms of your connection to yourself that you can do? First, acknowledge and accept the feelings. Uncertainty happens, it's uncomfortable. Acknowledge that, accept that you're having those feelings. Don't try and deny those feelings. That's not gonna help you in the long run. Just acknowledge, yeah, this is uncertain. I don't like it. I wish it was more certain. Acknowledge those feelings, and also think about what is in your control. So one of the things, there's a lot of research about this, and one of my favorite instances of this is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. My colleagues are probably tired of hearing me talk about this book, but I reread it again recently, and it's really connected with me. And one of his points throughout that book is that he had to constantly remind himself of what he could control, which from his perspective, it was his mindset and how he viewed being in concentration camp. For us, it might be other things, but to acknowledge and accept that we don't have all the control, but we do have some control, and to think about what those things are, and to acknowledge that we can control the media that we consume, we can control how much time we spend on our phones, we can control that. So just acknowledge those things and think about what is in your control. As far as connecting to the transcendent, keep connecting. It's always good, even as questions arise, with people who are religious, taking those questions to your higher power can be very helpful to process, but keep connecting. And that's been tough, with I've heard this a lot from patients and staff members with churches closed throughout the pandemic. This was hard. And virtual gatherings are just not the same. It's not really in our DNA, where we are social and meant to be around each other. So the virtual meetings weren't the same, but it's important to keep doing that and to keep connecting in how people are comfortable, because those connections are so important. Others, find support, find people that you can talk to, support groups, or just good friends who communicate that they are with you through this. They're going to listen to you vent when you need to vent, and help you reframe when you need to reframe. So find that support and establish and maintain boundaries. The issue with uncertainty is it creates so much emotional turmoil with ourselves when people add to that their uncertainty and they just unload about what's going on in their lives. It can be hard. So we need to think about relationships that aren't going to be that aren't as beneficial, and how to maintain boundaries while maintaining that connection. But you do have to think about your own reserves and how you recuperate. So think about establishing and maintaining boundaries to protect yourself. And meaning, again, it's going to look different, but think about who and what matters to you and stay focused on those things. Continue to make meaning and pursue meaning, but keep those things in the forefront of your mind as you're dealing with uncertainty. What matters, and how can I connect with those meaningful aspects of my life, even if it does look different? And keep dreaming, keep pursuing purpose. Even though there's uncertainty, don't stop having those dreams and those goals. Again, it might look different, but keep that up. Another challenge that we face, and this has been especially prevalent, is isolation and loneliness. And social isolation which social isolation and loneliness are a little bit different. So I like to break them out, talk about them individually. Social isolation is the inadequate quality and quantity of social relations with other people. So you don't have a circle of people that you can talk to or support you. And we are currently living through an isolating time, and it's getting better, but it still can be very isolating. People have different levels of comfort, and that's fine. We got to be comfortable with the way that we interact right now. And so it can be very isolating. One of the challenges with social isolation is that people sometimes are okay being socially isolated. It doesn't always create these feelings of distress. Sometimes it does. And that's when it leads to loneliness. So some people are fine being isolated. They don't need a lot of people around. They want to be isolated, and they're fine with that. But it can also lead to loneliness. And loneliness is an enduring condition of emotional distress that arises when a person feels estranged from, misunderstood, or rejected by others. And this is when it becomes a bigger problem. Both are not great. You want to have a connection and don't want to be isolated, but loneliness is often accompanied with those uncomfortable feelings. It feels painful. It's not good for our health. And there is, again, a lot of research being done on loneliness, especially through the pandemic, that shows how social we are and how we thrive when we're connected to other people. So isolation and loneliness, we want to combat those, even though we are living in a very isolating time. So let's think again about that spiritual framework. Quality of relationships is very important, as I will talk about. So we want to combat isolation and move towards connection. The one thing you have to ask yourself is, are you self-isolating? And if the connections aren't fulfilling, why not? Why aren't those relationships in your life fulfilling? Self-isolation, I think, has become, especially lately, a big concern, because I've even felt this tension in myself. I've gotten out of these habits of going to church and not being meeting with people in person, and it can be tempting to stay there, to say, I've gone without that group for a long time. I don't need to re-engage there. I kind of like not having that. Well, that's dangerous, because again, we are made for those connections. So let's push through the self-isolation. It really has become a discipline in my life to re-engage in like my small group, to get myself in church regularly again. I've had to push against that temptation to self-isolate and just be comfortable at home. So push through that. And if your connections aren't fulfilling, why not? That's what I'm getting at when I talk about the quality of relationships. We can be around a lot of people and not be connecting. We really connect when we open up our lives, and people open up their lives to us. That's when we are really connecting. You can listen to someone talk and not connect. You can not hear what they're saying, not be engaged with them. And you can also experience that on the other end. So you're opening up about what's going on in your life and doesn't feel like people are listening to you. That might be why those connections aren't fulfilling, and you might need to address that in some way, or press into those people who really are good listeners and hear you. And at the same time, give that back to them. Make sure you're a good listener too. As far as transcendent, how can we reconnect there? Just keep pursuing that connection. I know church attendance has been down. This is just an example from the Christian perspective, but church attendance has gone down, and really encouraging people to pursue those connections. I know a lot of other clubs and groups have stopped meeting, but and attendance is down when they do start meeting, because people are just used to not being in that space where they connect beyond themselves. And I think we really want to push through that and pursue those connections. Others, find peer support. Everything, every kind of group in the hospital faces in the healthcare system faces their own challenges. My wife's in healthcare, though she's in kind of insurance aspects of care, and she finds a lot of peer support for her colleagues and the stuff that they endure and kind of their challenges. And so they support each other. As a chaplain, that we support each other and support others. And so finding the peer group that is going to help support you and communicate that they're there with you, they understand, I can't always talk about what I face as a chaplain with my wife. There's just not a shared understanding there, although sometimes it's also helpful. But I also think peer support is very helpful, and virtual gatherings, might not always feel the best, but they do connect us in ways that I don't think we quite understood the power of that before COVID. It's kind of, maybe we're a little bit burnt out on that now, but at the same time, we can do lunch and learn presentations and all of these things and connect with people in various places. Watched Isabel Wilkerson's presentation, her lecture. So those things might not always be possible before, but virtual gatherings are a way for us to connect. So let's keep doing that as long as we need to. And think about, again, who matters to you, who is meaningful. When you walk away from interactions with people, who do you feel rejuvenated by and feel refreshed and feel heard? And make sure you're pressing into that. Spend time with them, connect with them. First, pay attention to it, and then figure out who those people are and continue to pursue those relationships. And use your experience to support others, I think is very crucial for purpose. It can be a way, if we don't know how to engage, offering support to those in need can be a huge way to make purpose during difficult times. And if we think about our diagram, we're pressing into the uncertainty and learning to live with the uncertainty and thinking about what's in our control. We're combating the isolation we feel, and we're making our way, kind of a detour around the difficult things that life throws at us, trying to reconnect with those things and that are meaningful, that are important in our spiritual lives. When we press into our spirituality, it helps us kind of reconnect. So our diagram begins to have a detour around those difficult things. But what do we do about grief? Grief, simply stated, is one's response to an important loss. And I think grief, we all have important things in our life, and we've all lost important things in our lives. Important people, important jobs or roles. There's been a lot of loss. Ideas that we had have been, maybe we are coming to new understanding about the way we view ourselves in the world throughout the past 20 months or more. And there can be grief because of that. Grief is a universal experience that it goes unacknowledged the vast majority of the time. Even visiting with patients who have lost a lot, when I say that's a big loss, I bet you experience grief about that. There's a tendency to deny, oh no, it's not that bad. But yeah, grief is a part of our life. We lose important things. So acknowledging that grief, it is expressed in a great deal of ways, a lot of different theories about grief and how it's expressed, but common expressions are sadness, anger, guilt and regret, denial, hopelessness. And traditionally, grief was thought to move in stages. You probably heard that, the 5 stages of grief. That's traditionally how it was thought. It comes from the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. However, modern grief theory has kind of disproven that it doesn't really work that way, that we don't move through distinct phases like that. And think of it as a mosaic. This is one way to think of it. I really like this from Melissa Kelly. She writes, if we are limited in our understanding of grief, we risk seeing only a part of the mosaic. And her book, just simply titled Grief, is really good. Really simple to understand. Doesn't go too much into theory, but is very helpful. And I like the grief as mosaic way of thinking about it, because instead of those distinct phases, look at the mosaic and how all of those different colors are scattered amongst themselves. There's not a distinct, within the yellow, there's white, within the blue, there's orange, and it is a mosaic. It's kind of, things are everywhere. And that's how grief is. You can be happy one day, sad the next, angry and denial the next. It doesn't move in those phases. And so recognizing that something has been lost and that's where these emotions are coming from is very important. And so that's how we think about grieving. Grief is the emotion or the experience. Grieving is the coping process. Grieving is how we get through the grief. And I don't want to say get through. You don't really get through grief. Grief kind of just transforms the way you think about life. There's not really a getting through. It's always a journey. And people I was talking to a patient today, and her mother died in 2003, and was talking about how she still has grief and is grieving that. And it becomes more bearable as the grieving process goes, but we never really get through grief. And there's 4 principles of grieving according to this theory. It's you acknowledge the reality of the loss. And that, I think, is so hard for people to just acknowledge that something here has been lost, whether that's an idea of how you viewed certain things that's been stripped from you, whether that's an important person that you've lost, whether that is a role or function or something that you've lost. Acknowledge that you lost something. That is a real loss. And I think we often skip that step, skip this step too a lot of times, which is working through those emotions that come from the loss. Working through that, recognizing that's a part of grieving, and then adjusting to the environment. And I think that's often where we go. And I don't think there's any research on this. It's something I'd like to test someday. But if you think about kind of a lot of the anger and frustration that occurs within our country when there's a big loss, big national loss or national crisis, I think we don't acknowledge it. We don't work through the emotions. We immediately go to step 3, which is trying to make sense of the environment around us. We want that security, and we go too far. We go too fast, and everything becomes a battle. Just to acknowledge, and I think we would be much better served. We just acknowledge the reality of the loss, work through those emotions, then adjust to the environment, and then loosen ties and try to relearn what life is like now and on the other side of this loss as we've worked through it. So to loosen those ties and kind of relearn. And so let's live those 4 principles of grief by looking at our spiritual framework. So from a self perspective, to connect with yourself, acknowledge the loss and allow yourself to feel the emotions, which it can be uncomfortable. It's not always pleasant, but is really helpful to acknowledge that you lost something and work through those emotions. And the key here is discover effective and authentic ways to work through the emotions. I think people respond differently to emotions and how to work through them best. Some people art works. I had patients who suddenly start writing poetry, to communicate their grief. Never wrote poetry before. Suddenly they're writing poetry, and it helps them to work through. Some people want to get out and connect with the transcendent. Figure out how you work through emotions. Maybe it's journaling, and do that. What is authentic to you? Try different things. And work through that grief after you've acknowledged and you're feeling those emotions. Do practices to work through those, whatever that is for you. One of the ways we can connect to the transcendent or that which is beyond us is connection through lamentation. And within the Judeo-Christian framework, lamentation is a huge thing. The Bible is full of laments. So Hebrew scripture is full of laments. That's part of that faith background. Not a part of every faith background, but definitely Judeo-Christian. And if you have no faith background, getting that out, lamenting is an important practice that grief therapists use. Just writing letters or getting that out. And a lot of times they will just shred that when they're done, or some people like to hold on to it. It's whatever you want, but getting that out and lamenting what has been lost is important. And this is a place where art music therapy comes a lot. I really think art music therapy are fantastic interventions for people who are dealing with grief, since we are struggle mightily to work through those emotions and name emotions. Doing something like art, painting can be very effective to get out what can't be spoken, what people have a hard time speaking. So how can we connect to others? Peer support, again, very helpful. Grief support groups. There can be a lot of grief around the holidays. There are support groups for that. So seek those out. Grief support groups right there. Relearning or reorienting is one of the ways in which meaning comes into play. Kind of meaning, relearning is how we think about the world as we process the loss, how we make meaning of that loss and learn to live in a world without what we've lost. And there are grieving tasks, and those grieving tasks, you can set goals for yourself if you're working through grief. I'm going to do this today. I'm going to do this today. Make your purpose working through that grief, and give yourself grace if you don't feel like doing it one day. You don't always have to work through it, but make that a task if you would. So let's think a bit again about our diagram here. It's becoming more connected. But let's think about hope. What is the role of hope? Let's start by defining it. And I love this definition. Hope is a multidimensional life force characterized by a confident yet uncertain expectation of achieving a future good. So hope began to be looked at more carefully in the 1980s within the medical practice. Nurses in particular are looking at and researching what is hope, how do people think about hope, how can we use hope to help people, and they came up with this definition. And there have been other studies, a lot of studies about hope at this point, really good. And I really like the multidimensional aspect. It's not expressed or experienced in only one way. How people think about hope is various, and it varies day to day even. So how we think about hope is multidimensional. And I think that's important to realize, because the way in which you think about hope might not be how someone else thinks about hope. And so being aware that people have hope and express it in different ways, very important. It's also a life force. And I really love this phrase because it reminds us that hope has power. It motivates, it inspires, it's a force. It's not, a two-dimensional concept that we read about. It's something that motivates people. It has real power. It's a force. And it's rooted in a confident yet uncertain expectation. So from the perspective of the hoping person, I believe this can happen. I'm confident, but it is uncertain. So there can be moments of confidence, moments where we're feeling optimistic, we're feeling happy and joyful, but there can be moments where we're not so sure. It's uncertain. It's not clear. And it's rooted in achieving a future good. It feels achievable and it feels positive. It keeps us going. And a lot of the research bears these principles out. This definition comes from kind of the landmark study that was done to kind of look at hope. So let's think about how we foster hope. How can we foster hope in our lives? And let's think about it in the framework, that spiritual framework that I shared. So things that have been shown to foster hope: laughter, joy, lightheartedness, gratitude, and celebrating wins. So laughter, joy, and lightheartedness, there are some times where I just need to laugh. And like to be around funny people, like to watch those shows that I know are going to get me to laugh, those movies I know are going to get me to laugh. I just need that lightheartedness after a tough day. And so we'll go to one of our go-to movies or shows to get laughs. Also, being around certain people who are funny can be very helpful to kind of lighten the mood, lift the spirit, foster some hope. I also want to focus on gratitude and celebrating our wins. So being grateful for what we have in our life is one piece of that, and celebrating the things that we've done. So what have you accomplished? What are the wins in your life for the day? Reflecting on that at the end of the day can be very helpful to help foster hope, to make you, as you go to bed, think about, I did achieve some good things today. Overall will boost hope in your life. So there's a lot of research that shows that prayer, receiving prayer, religious and spiritual services boost hope, as well as meditation. Time in nature, listening to cherished music, all of these things boost hope. I mean, one of the things that definitely boosts my hope is when Sunny 95, a radio station here, turns to all Christmas music. And there are times when I just want to listen to Frosty the Snowman on the way home from work. So finding that music that gives you hope, spending time in nature, also a thing I really like to do. Meditation, again, and going to those religious services if that's an important part of your life. Also, fostering hope, important, interperson connectedness. That has been a common way, as we've seen in all three: uncertainty, isolation, and then grief. interpersonal connectedness is crucial. And you want to be around those people. Again, I was talking about quality of relationships, those people who communicate, I'm with you. Those people that are going to be with you where you are. If you're having a rough day, they're there. All of that can help build hope in the long run, as well as touch. Research on touch is becoming, it's more and more common. One of the things I recently saw was a study that looked at, like, when you think if you're holding a baby and you're kind of patting their back, there are a ton of things that happen neurologically that go on from that touch. And so even today as adults, when someone pats your back, that can be a very soothing thing. Make sure people are comfortable with touch before you touch them, obviously, but think about how you can incorporate that with people you trust. And then fostering hope, again, meaning is a crucial part of fostering hope. Thinking about what is meaningful, making meaning of what you're encountering in life, very important. And think about aims for today and aims for tomorrow, which are just goals. How do you want to structure your day? Lately, I've been every night journaling. What do I want to accomplish tomorrow? How do I want to view the day tomorrow? And thinking about legacy. This is something that we talk about with patients a lot. How do you want to be remembered? But it's also good to check in with yourself. How do you want to be remembered? And because there will be a day when you might not be here. So think about how you want to be remembered, and then how to live so that is how you are remembered. It's connected. Thinking about how we want to be remembered and the things we want to leave with people can help us foster hope and help us live lives that are more fulfilling. And if we think about these things, they fit in with the spiritual framework. They're connection to self, connection to transcendent, connection to others, connection to meaning, and connection to purpose. When we press in there, we can foster hope in our lives. And all of this helps us overcome those roadblocks, those things that get in the way of our spiritual life and lead to spiritual distress. By doing these things, by pressing into those different components that represent spirituality, we can overcome those things and make meaning and overcome them in that way. And new meaning, I put new meaning in quotes because it's just really is becoming to new understandings of the world and how we fit within it. As we press into our spirituality to overcome the challenges that we face, we come to new understandings of the world and what we do and our role. And it transforms our habits, our motives, our behaviors, which makes sense. You're adding these practices into your life. It's going to transform you. It's going to transform what you do. And you come to new perspectives and new beliefs about yourself, about the world, about important relationships in your lives. And in short, the important things come into view in light of the challenges and the changes that you face. And that is a part of pursuing the connections and your spiritual life will shape that. They guide that process. So that is my hope for you. As you encounter the challenges that come along, I hope that you are able to press into just one or two of those connections that are important in your life and hopefully shape the meaning and hope that you have. And I just include some additional resources that are available, different understandings of grief, different understandings of meaning and how to make meaning in the hard things that we deal with. And then a book by Dr. Kurt Thompson about spirituality and neuroscience. So thank you. And I'm ready for any questions.
That was wonderful, Richard. Thank you so much. That was really informative, and all of the strategies you gave us and resources and all these great takeaways are wonderful. So everyone, any questions you have, go ahead and get them in the chat while we wait for those to come in and give you time to think on them. I'll just mention everyone will be receiving a follow-up email. And in this, it'll have directions on how you can access the recording. It does take a couple days to get posted, so just a heads up on that, as well as a link to an evaluation. If you could take just a couple minutes, real quick survey, just giving us some feedback on how we can better our programs for you guys. So be on the lookout for that. It'll go out later today. Checking the chat for any questions. While we wait for them, I have one, so I'll go ahead and do mine. I was just wondering how your work and kind of your day-to-day work has changed from like pre-COVID to post-COVID. Did you, or like in COVID, if you noticed much of a change or kind of what any shifts were there?
Yeah, it changed a great deal. One of the things that especially when there was visitor restrictions, as those, a lot more distress, a lot more feeling isolated and feeling the pain of not having loved ones with them. That was really hard on people. So luckily we were here, we were in the hospital during that time, and we were able to visit with patients and spend some time with them and help them process that. Another thing that we started doing was making phone calls when there was visitor restrictions. If things have become more with visitors allowed back in and things like that, we're able to, we don't do as many phone calls, but it's still a part. Every now and then we'll have to call someone who can't see their loved one. So it's changed it quite a deal, quite a bit, a lot more distress, a lot more heightened emotion.
Thank you. We had a couple questions come in during that. So the first one is, how do you open a conversation with families whose loved ones are critically ill?
I mean, that is a good question. It varies. It's rooted in, a lot of it is the situation, what I know about the situation, if I've met the person before, but it's a lot of just saying, here to support you. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself or the patient, or it depends on the mood of the room too, and kind of what's preceded it. If there was a difficult meeting, it could just be presence and helping them process that. It varies depending on the situation, but just trying to meet people where they are and they're in that moment.
Thank you. Next up was a question asking, how would you advise helping someone who appears to be self-isolating?
That's a really good question. I think just being curious, talking with them, asking them questions, checking in with them, seeing how they're going, how they're doing. And then if you get the sense that they are, being willing to put yourself out there and call that out and say, it seems like you're isolating yourself. I'm your friend or neighbor, or however you know the person, and just try and get them, make them feel heard, and then share your experience of how you've experienced them, and let them know you do think they're isolating. So I think that's the best way to go. I think is, first of all, to exhibit curiosity, ask about how they're doing, and check in with them to see if that's accurate, if what you're sensing is accurate, and then go from there and be willing to put yourself out there and say, I think you're isolating.
Thank you. And next we had someone asking if you could maybe go back just a couple slides about the reading suggestions and the resources that you had. I will say these slides were sent out. They'll be in the follow-up email. So they're sent out, so you guys will have it, but here are the resources for the individual asking. Okay. Any other questions from anybody? Give it a couple seconds for you to get them in there. Right, I'm not seeing anything else come through. So I can give everyone about 10 minutes back in your day. Had some wonderful questions coming in. So thank you for those that asked those questions. They were great. So Richard, thank you so much again for being here, taking us through all this, giving us all the resources and strategies. They're super helpful for everybody. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and joined us and had wonderful questions and comments in there. We really appreciate you joining us, and have a great weekend and a great rest of your week, great holiday season coming up. So everyone, bye.
Thank you.